I don't know if it's true, people.
They are going to keep Dad in prison at least until this gets on. Brings back a lot of memories of when I was last here, back on December 31st. It's not a good day that you received the body that's signs of injuries such as gunshot wounds or stabbing. He was wearing black pants, a white shirt, and some type of black garment covering his upper torso area. And as we took a closer look, I noticed a ring that stood out as no ring that I had ever seen before. The ring was a West Point ring. I could tell right away that this was something this was not a mystifying official body found in a landfill, and you just think to yourself, that's a targeted murder. It sounds like something the mob would do. Nobody ever intended this person to be found.
Police discovered the body last Friday morning at a landfill, and over the weekend officially identified the victim as John Wheeler.
So the sensational aspects of Jack's
murder were what first attracted me. But you could say that, I came for the murder but ended up staying for the man, right? Because he lived a really fascinating life.
Let me now introduce to you Mr. John Wheeler. Thank you, Dan.
A lot of people claim to be patriots. Jack was a patriot.
In our youth, our hearts were touched with fire. In the Vietnam War, each American was touched with fire.
Jack was devoted to causes that were for the great benefit of the country, such as being executive director of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial.
John Wheeler served in Vietnam, and when he came back, he began planning a memorial for all those who fought and died there.
Well, Jack was a very exceptional person, a graduate of West Point, a graduate of Harvard Business School, a graduate of Yale Law School. This guy was extremely bright. In 1982, as we were building the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, he provided the overall strategy, guidance, was the chairman of the board. And how could it have happened without him? It wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have happened.
I actually hired Jack in 2004 when I got sworn in as Secretary of the Air Force within the George Bush administration. Jack brought an intensity to life that few of us manifest. Jack thought outside of the box before there was a box.
We need to expand our definition of who's wounded, not just people killed by a ballistic incident, by a bullet, or wounded by a bullet. It's got to be people who suffer after the war.
He accomplished so much, and he did it all with the equivalent of a piano strapped to his back, because he had bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is marked by bouts of frenetic activity. But there's also no doubt that it has a really awful reverse side where he could be very impulsive and overly emotional. So there's no question it propelled him forward and it held him back. And what he did get done is all the more impressive because it was that much harder for him.
Jack was passionate about everything he did. Whatever you ask him to do or ask him about, doesn't matter if it was a U.S. foreign policy or the guy next door who needed help with the city council or any, it didn't matter. He would put the same energy into everything he did. Jack and I were married for 13 years. We lived in Harlem and we had a house in Newcastle. He had 2 kids that were twins that he adored, and I had 2 kids and he treated my kids like they were his. I met Jack when my mother started dating, and he was a funny, sort of cheesy, but very serious man. Being married to Jack means it's never dull. It's full of unexpected things, which I like. When I first met Jack, I remember talking to him and saying something about George Balanchine Ballet. And he said, I watched Balanchine choreograph George. I said, you did? Now that's like saying to a drug addict, I have a lifetime supply of anything you want. I mean, it was, because I love Jules. I love all Balanchine Ballet. A soldier who loves ballet. I just thought how lucky I was. Oh, I loved him with all my heart. I really did.
I was on my way to Washington, and I got a call that Jack knew he never will. You know, everybody loved him.
It was a sudden shock. There was no indication as to why someone would want to murder Jack Wheeler.
It's very hard to wrap your head around that all of a sudden Jack had been found in the landfill, and it didn't make sense. To find a body in a landfill seems to me like it would be a place someone who didn't want him to be found would put him. And I'm very surprised that we actually did find him. That to me is a miracle, and one that we're very grateful for. I'm not sure when I got a phone call. Jack's daughter called me up and she said, Jack's dead. It was incredulous. I didn't know, I couldn't make sense of it. It didn't seem possible. It didn't seem possible that the world could go on without him. It's just, that can't be true. How do you have a world without Jack? That's what. I remember we went down to see his body at the police station. We went into this room and he was covered from the chest down with a sheet, and they would let us see just his face, and the rest of him we didn't see. And probably that's just as well, because from what I learned later, he had been pretty well beaten up, tossed around.
This had to be a professional hit job. The way he was dumped into that landfill tells me that somebody deliberately went out and got him. Something is very, very wrong and a great tragedy to America.
Jack had a very strong network with government. He worked as an assistant to the Secretary of the Air Force for a time, and his contacts within the government were extremely strong. And because of his government service, he may have been the target of a murder for hire type situation.
What we know is that at the time of his death, he was working as a consultant for the MITRE Corporation, which is a defense contracting firm. They specialize in stuff like artificial intelligence, satellite systems for the military. Jack was working in the area of cybersecurity. He was working on the issues that we're seeing now made manifest with Russia interfering with the election, Russia and China supposedly hacking into our power grid. That's the stuff that Wheeler was working on at the time. The problem, though, is that there's nothing to connect those parts of his bio to his actual murder. The confounding part is that when you reach into these things individually, your hand just kind of goes right through, right? You get caught up in it and you can go down all these blind paths. I think that what we have to do, because this is such a mystery, is absolutely remain open-minded.
The body was here for several hours that day. We had to call out the evidence detection unit, boarding off the location, and making sure that we did a thorough search. I have never searched for evidence at a landfill within my 23-year career, and this being the first time, we took precautions. Any kind of evidence that you're actually looking for could be contaminated with the trash that's mixed in. We're looking for other pieces of clothing, we're looking for potentially a cell phone, and we did not find anything other than just trash that had been disposed of. We were able to positively identify the victim, John Wheeler, that day, and After finding out that this was Mr. Wheeler and that he had a house in Newcastle City, I immediately contacted the Newcastle City Police Department and spoke with a detective who advised me that they were actually en route to Mr. Wheeler's house, investigating a potential burglary. And that's when this investigation turned a page to something larger than finding Mr. Wheeler at the landfill.
I knew Jack as a temporary next door neighbor. He was never here for very long, but I got involved in being the caretaker of the house. Jack, he was just an interesting character. I always liked Jack. He was never one to sit down and just casually talk to you. He was always doing something or had something on his mind. So anyhow, I was talking to my neighbor, and that's when I happened to notice that Jack's second floor rear window was open. So being a good neighbor, I went over into the house. Now when I came in, the storm door was closed, but this door was ajar like that. And then I just walked in here and kind of saw the turmoil in the kitchen. There was a tree, a tall tree, sitting on that bay window, and that was tipped over, and spices were all over the place. They were all over the floor, all over the table. There were a bunch of broken dishes in the sink, and right by my feet, there was white powder on the floor, and I could see it was probably Comet because there was a Comet can sitting here on the counter. And there was also Jack's ceremonial West Point sword and shield on the floor right there. And then I did notice that there was a bare footprint in the Comet right in front of the sink. I was sure it was burglary, because things were in such a state of turmoil. I figured somebody had broken in and probably through this side door.
Jack's neighbor calls the police, and the police happen to have just been notified of the body at the landfill and discovered Jack there. So you can imagine it's a pretty frantic scene. So to add to the confusion, there's another investigation happening across the street from Jack's house in Newcastle.
There are new clues in the mysterious death of former White House aide John Wheeler. This is a new video you're looking at from inside his neighbor's house under construction.
So it turns out that just a few days before Jack's body was found, someone had set off a couple of smoke bombs at a construction site across the street. There wasn't much damage, but it's a weird turn in the story, because police found a cell phone at the site, and when they examined it, they discovered it was Jack Wheeler's. So you've got all these things happening at once. Jack's body found in a landfill, a burglary investigation at his house, and an investigation into the smoke bombs across the street. So you have to wonder how or if all these things are connected.
In 2010, I was the FBI agent assigned to the Violent Crime Unit in Wilmington, Delaware. The FBI was called in to the Jack Wheeler case with regards to him having a past relationship with the Pentagon as an employee, and the fact that he had worked for a couple of presidential administrations. ATF was involved, DEA was involved. We're talking at least 10 different agencies, federal, state, and local, running down every possible lead.
Police are working now to reconstruct the last few days of John Wheeler's life, hoping that will help them solve the mystery of Who killed this prominent advocate for veterans and why?
The last time I saw him, he had been in D.C. He came up to New York on Christmas Eve, and we had Christmas Day, and all the kids were there.
We always go to my mom's for Christmas dinner. It was very much like it always is. And Jack was in very good spirits.
The next day, he said he had to go back to D.C. I was annoyed because I thought we were going to go to the movies. After Christmas, we'd gone to movies that we'd missed. And it was things that we could do with the kids too, which was always nice.
My mom was not happy that he decided to leave after Christmas. But that was Jack. He was always working and he always had 15 different things happening at once. So we know from the time that he got on the train and went into Washington, D.C. that Jack was on his phone a lot. So we knew from talking to people that he worked with and his family that he lived by the phone, which is a good thing for investigators in piecing together a timeline.
On December 28th, Jack goes and works in D.C. for only a day. Later that day, Jack's phone records show he must have left D.C. and he comes home to Newcastle. Jack and Kathy kept this beautiful, elegant home in Newcastle, right at the edge of a historic park. And that night, you've got this smoke bomb incident across the street.
The next day, I had tried to call him and I couldn't reach him. And I thought, why would he not be answering his phone? That never before had I not been able to reach him.
On the morning of December 29th, Jack contacted Leiter where he was employed and told them that there had been a break-in at his home. He told them that he had lost certain items that he would typically use for access to their business. That he lost his wallet, his key fob, his briefcase, as well as his cell phone.
His cell phone was extremely important. He used it for everything. I'm sure he was very stressed to have lost his cell phone.
Of course, it is curious that Jack doesn't notify the police that there was a break-in and doesn't notify Kathy. That's a little weird. Once Jack loses his cell phone, that also leaves investigators in a bit of a quandary as they're trying to track him and create a timeline of his movements because they can't use the cell phone anymore. Now that he didn't have his phone, all they had were witness sightings, which aren't always accurate, and any surveillance footage they could find.
Video was obtained that showed that Jack had been
How did we
inside
do Jack
a pharmacy on
placed?
the 29th in
Crossways
Old Newcastle, not far
from
from
the
Jack's
middle
house.
above the stern at the bottom of the stern.
Jack's a familiar figure in this pharmacy. This is where
Down
he
on
gets
his gut
his
and then
prescriptions
across under
filled
his
whenever
rib.
he's in Newcastle. But this time he's looking for a ride to Wilmington.
There were a couple of people that were in the pharmacy at the time that heard the conversation and offered to take Jack to Wilmington.
Investigators believe Jack wanted to get to Wilmington to get his car, which was parked at the Amtrak station there. That's where Jack left his car when he went to New York for Christmas. And so he obtains a ride around 6 p.m. into Wilmington. And the next we know is around 6:42, I think it was. He shows up in a parking garage. He's trying to find his car, but he's in the wrong garage. He He's blocks from where his car is actually parked.
Finding his way around was challenging for him. He was certainly directionally challenged. That's why, for example, he liked to walk around Madison Square Park multiple times for his exercise, because he knew where it was and it was a square. So it would be hard for him to get lost.
He didn't have a good sense of direction. He had almost no sense of direction. And he would lose things. He would park his car and not be able to find it.
Jack was famous for coming home in a cab on days that he'd driven to work because he would forget where he parked. So he constantly was misplacing his car because he was so caught up in his to-do list, so caught up in whatever project he was working on, that it was like he didn't want to devote any brain space to remembering where something was. At the parking garage, the footage is haunting. Jack is in a completely different state than he was in when he was at the pharmacy. He appears in great distress. He's agitated. He's got one shoe off and the other shoe in his hand. And you can see that at times he appears to sort of peek around a corner or look out a door before he goes through it, like he's scared he's being stalked. And he tells the people in the parking garage that his briefcase has been stolen.
He said to me his parking ticket was inside his briefcase. So I said, well, where's your briefcase at? He said his briefcase was stolen from him. So when I kept asking him how was it stolen, all he kept saying to me, my briefcase was stolen. It was stolen.
That 40-minute time frame between when Jack is seen at the pharmacy and when he appears in so much distress at the parking garage is one of the fundamental, foundational mysteries surrounding his homicide.
When I saw the surveillance footage, it didn't look like Jack. It looks to me like he was trying to get away from something or someone. And I think not having his phone, for example, was, or being able to find his car, made him more afraid.
Jack had bipolar disorder, and it may have been the reason he was acting that way. Most of the time I was with him, he was just regular old Jack. Every now and then he would get a little manic, I guess. He was pretty diligent about taking his pills. But bipolar disorder is mysterious and very unpredictable.
He might have had some significant mental break. And it's also possible that he was physically attacked. Maybe his foot was injured in some sort of scuffle, and that's why he pulled off his shoe. It seems like this central mystery, and I would love to know what happened during that 40-minute time span between when Jack is seen at the pharmacy and when he appears at the parking garage. The next time Jack is picked up on camera, according to the cops, it's 20 hours later. He's in the basement of the Nemours building, which is an office complex in downtown Wilmington. Investigators later found evidence that Jack spent the night and part of the day in this basement.
So this is the corner of 11th and Orange in downtown Wilmington, where a lot of the police investigation centered on Jack Wheeler's whereabouts, and he had been seen on surveillance camera in the tunnel located underneath where we're standing now, and in a couple of shots in the hallways. There are many hallways, access ways, alleyways. There is a fitness center, employee lockers, etc. So there is a lot of ground to cover, looking to see where possibly Jack may have gone into. some of the employees of the Morris building had said they had seen something in a stairwell that could have been where somebody would have stayed. We were not able to find any personal effects that would have told law enforcement that belonged to Jack.
There's some mystery over why Jack would go to the Morris building. No one really knows what Jack's connection would have been to that building or that basement. He couldn't get to his car, and so now it's like he's gone to ground. His activities seem more like a guy trying to hide and figure out a careful way out of town. At one point he's asking to go to Philadelphia, potentially, I guess, to get an Amtrak train to New York where he might join Kathy. And it's just a mystery. At 8:30 p.m., Jack shows up exiting the building. Now he's wearing a dark-colored hoodie, which is something suited, Washington, D.C. insider Jack Wheeler had not worn to anybody's knowledge before.
This is the valet section for the Hotel DuPont. Jack moves quickly past, probably walking along the same pathway that I'm walking, and comes into the view of one camera, continues on through the overpass, and that is the last camera shot that we have of Jack Wheeler alive.
When I couldn't reach him, I was uncertain what to do. I didn't pace around and think, oh dear, something terrible has happened. I thought something's wrong, but I just didn't let myself imagine that something bad had happened or something terrible.
December 31st, 2010. It was just a typical day. It was cold. I went to work, went to the landfill, went on top, dumped off. I got off the scale and I went around to jump on 495, and my dispatch called me and said, go back to the landfill, they found a body in the pile. When we got on top of the landfill, all the bosses from the landfill and everybody was coming up. I seen the body there, sticking up out of the pile. It jolted you a little bit. It kind of freaked me. Dad was kind of freaked out. I asked them guys to go cover him up. They went and covered him up, and we waited for the police to come.
Any investigation of a homicide, you have a crime scene. You have somewhere to go, and early on, there was no crime scene to be found, other than the landfill. After combing through tons and tons of trash, the investigators determined that the trash surrounding the body of Jack Wheeler had come from the city of Newark. That is when the case was turned over to Newark Police. And so the Newark Police Department were able to come up with a particular trash truck that they believed picked up the body of Jack Wheeler. They zeroed in on a couple of dumpsters on its trash route. The forensic unit went out and started swabbing these dumpsters. And thereby were able to come up with a partial DNA match to Jack Wheeler, to one of those dumpsters.
To my knowledge, he had no connection to Newark, Delaware. I was stunned. I would think, they must be making a mistake.
So this is another big twist in the case, because the last time Jack was seen, he was in Wilmington, 14 miles away, different town, and in the opposite direction from where he had been walking. So how does he end up at a dumpster in Newark, Delaware?
A lot of time was spent just trying to figure out how Jack got out of Wilmington, going south into Newark. There was a witness that came forth that had seen Jack in a taxi cab. According to this witness, Jack Wheeler shared the cab when Jack had heard that the cab was going to Newark. So you have to go with that, but you also don't want to ignore the fact that the witness may have misidentified just another individual that looked like Jack Wheeler. We don't want to lose the fact that he could have taken a train from Wilmington to Newark. It is very frustrating to not come up with any one definitive answer.
We're at the Delaware College of Arts, where I usually run my route at. We got two cans here. One's an 8-yarder, one's a 6-yarder. Got the side doors here. If you can tell, the side door's up real high on the 8-yarder. If you come over to the 6-yarder, the side door over on the 6-yarder is kind of shorter to where somebody can climb in real easy. Easier than an 8-yarder.
When we spoke to the trash truck drivers, they told us that it was fairly common that people would go in there and actually sleep, or people would go into those dumpsters to find some warmth in the winter months.
I'll drive up to a stop and I'm gonna put my forks in. And either somebody will pop up through the top, or they'll just climb out the side door. We call them hollers, because that's all they do is they jump up out of the can and they start hollering, whoa, 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 like that and everything. And sometimes you can hear them and sometimes you can't.
So there's been a theory of Jack's death that maybe he wanders out into the night. Maybe he just gets cold and crawls into a dumpster to escape the winter.
The theory that he crawled into a dumpster to stay warm seems completely preposterous. I mean, in part because of the medical examiner's report that, it's concluded that he was murdered.
When you look at the autopsy and the degree to which he was beaten, it's just not consistent with a fall from a dumpster.
In the autopsy report, they're listed severe injuries such as punctured lung, broken ribs, and he had bleeding in the head.
Bruises to the face and orbital bones, temples, mouth, all these places you'd expect somebody to hit you if they were pummeling you, and he gets driven down to his knees. And when they describe the cause of death, it's just blunt force trauma.
So it seems like a severe beating. What I don't get is why would someone want to beat him so severely? Was it targeted? That's possible. Who would target him? That would create a lot of speculation. Was he in the wrong place at the wrong time?
One of the big questions in the case is whether or not Jack's murder was related to what happened in Newcastle that night when he came back from DC. Late at night, there is a smoke bomb incident at this house across the street. After this incident happens, the police find Jack's cell phone, and so one of the theories is he's the one who set off those smoke bombs. Jack was a passionate guy. At the time of his death, he was in a housing dispute with some people across the street who were building a big house on store at Battery Park. You talk to people about why he entered into this big legal effort to stop that house from being built. It was the history of Battery Park. It was the idea that somebody was going to build a private home on what to him was, public land and sacred land.
Jack liked being there. He liked being in Newcastle a lot. It was quiet, and it was old-fashioned, and Jack was sort of old-fashioned. We were both very unhappy about the house going up across the street, and he was very fired up about it. He got it into his head that this can't happen. This is a sacrilege. And bipolar disorder can make you more emotional and illogical.
I could just imagine Jack being so upset to come back to his house if he had done the smoke bomb. He comes back to his house. He realizes he doesn't have his phone. He realizes where it must be. And now he's upset. And Jack, who's very hard on himself, just flies into a kind of panic and just starts flinging stuff around. No one knows for sure what happened at Jack's house that night. And the whole case is so layered in various mysteries that we have to be open to varying explanations. But here's the thing, Jack's personal distress doesn't explain his murder. Someone killed him. And the question is whether or not it was somebody just happened to cross him when he was wandering around. And that theory kind of gets blown apart because the circumstances in which he's later found don't fit with a random mugging. Street muggers who wind up killing their victims leave the body where it drops. They don't hide it or load it into a dumpster. The other problem with the robbery theory is that when Jack's found, he apparently had some cash left on him. He's got a Rolex. And he's got his West Point ring. It just seems unlikely that in the case of a robbery, they're going to miss all that, right? Particularly if they've taken the time afterward to hide the body.
I don't think it was random. I do find it strange and unusual that given the reward we offered, that no one came forward with any tips or leads. As my mom said, perhaps because they'd already been paid. But we don't know. That's what we want to find out.
We all have enemies. And he may have been in a position where people thought that it would be better if Jack was not on this earth.
He always carried this briefcase around with him, and he had a security clearance, asked where he'd keep that stuff, and he claimed the briefcase was missing.
I would look at it and ask the question, what happened to the briefcase? Because we took many international trips, and he was never without that briefcase.
Investigators did everything possible to locate this briefcase. But from everything that investigators have searched in any other place that Jack might have been, we have not been able to come up with this briefcase. As an investigator, I can't exclude any theory, but somebody out there knows something came across Jack, whether in an insignificant way or not. Even if it's somebody who was not intending harm, but assisted Jack one way or another, they need to call in order to help investigators finally determine what happened to Jack.
I was proud of him for all the good work he'd done in his life. And for who he was. His life was devoted to service and service to his country. His whole life was focused on a way to be useful. That's what he wanted. He was a soldier. He was always a soldier. And he was good. I've never known anybody so good. Oh God, Jarvis.
He was silly and fun and kind, and it made you feel good to be around him. Because of how remarkable he was and how full of love. He cared very deeply about everything. He did. And took it to heart. He had the largest heart of anyone I know. So, I don't know, it's my dad.
It is very intriguing when you hear that a young, elegant, and identified woman is found dead in a hotel room. There must be a family out there somewhere that needs to know what happened to her. Why was she in Oslo? What was the reason for her visit? Why was she found dead with a bullet hole through her forehead? There are so many things we need to find out.
Jack Wheeler worked for the Reagan, the G.H.W. Bush, and the G.W. Bush administrations. And he was found in a landfill. And nobody understood what the motive for murder was. He was deeply involved in the development of the Vietnam War Memorial. Anyway, I had a vision that he was sliced from here and then across ways. I'm not